prepare to hear our scripture, if you were here last week, you heard me talk a lot about the contemplative life, drawing from my experience at the monastery and the need that we all have to go inward to examine the God that is inside each one of us. And today we hear about contemplation's twin, which is action, and the idea that in the life of faith, these two things go hand in hand. And so in our readings this morning, pay attention to that. So the first is a Psalm 63, that has very similar themes to the one we heard last week, if you were here, about our longing and our need for God. And there's a way that we can read these individually, that each of us has this longing and this thirst for God in our own hearts. But there's also a way that we can read these communally. The idea that as a community, we long for God to be made known in our world. We long for God's justice and peace to be made known in our nation. And so I invite you to think of it that way as you hear the psalm this morning. As with many of the psalms, we hear the whole gamut of human emotions. So we hear longing and lament. We hear thanksgiving and hope. And then at the very end, unfortunately, all psalms seem to end this way, we hear the little bit of the vengeance piece, or a little bit of the hope that the enemies will get what they deserve. And when we hear that, we remember that these are just human emotions. This is just where we are. It's who we are. And a way to think about it is that this is just part of our longing for, we want justice to be served. We want things to be in right order and right relationship. And this is just the human way that we understand things. And so I invite you again to listen for it that way. And then our second reading is from Mark. It picks up from where we left off last week, which was last week we heard about Jesus and his own contemplative life, taking time away to be silent, to pay attention to the God that was in him. And then from that place, he came out and did his teaching and his healing and his ministry. And so this is the first really one-on-one healing story we hear after that contemplative time. It's with a leper, and one thing that's important to remember again about leprosy, a skin disease, was that not only was the person physically unclean, but because of the disease, they would have been ostracized socially, culturally, religiously. They would have been on the margins. And so when Jesus does the healing, it's much more than just physical healing. It's about bringing people back into community, into connection, and into right relationship. So let us listen for the word of God.
Good morning.
Good morning.
These are really special readings. I'm so thrilled to be able to do it. From the Hebrew Testament, Psalm 63. O God, you are my God. I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. So I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory. Because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you. So I will bless you as long as I live. I will lift up my hands and call on your name. My soul is satisfied as with a rich feast, and my mouth praises you with joyful lips when I think of you on my bed and meditate on you in the watches of the night. For you have been my help, and in the shadow of your wings I sing for joy. My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. But those who seek to destroy my life shall go down into the depths of the earth. They shall be given over to the power of the sword. They shall be prey for jackals. But the king shall rejoice in God. All who swear by God shall exult. For the mouths of liars will be stopped. And from the Christian Testament, Mark chapter 1, verses 40 to 45. A leper came to Jesus begging him, and kneeling, the leper said to him, If you choose, you can make me clean. Moved with pity, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched the leper and said, I do choose. Be made clean. Immediately the leprosy left, and the person was made clean. After sternly warning him, Jesus sent the person away at once, saying, See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded, as a testimony to them. But the person went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the word, so that Jesus could no longer go into a town openly, but stayed out in the country, and people came to him from every quarter.
Well, good morning, you guys. It's good to see you this morning. And we heard two stories this morning. One about somebody saying they were hungry and thirsty, and one about Jesus healing somebody. And I'm wondering if you guys have ever felt hungry or thirsty. Have you ever felt that way before? Yeah, a few of you. So we sometimes feel that. We might get a little growl in our stomach, or our throat is dry, and we want some water or some food. But there are people who every day that's their experience. Every day they are hungry for food. Every day they are thirsty because there's not enough water where they live. And at the same time, sometimes when we hear this language in the Bible, when we hear about hunger and thirst, it's also a way to express when we want something really bad. And so not only are there people hungry and thirsty for food and drink, but there's also people who are, you would say, are hungry for a safe place to live. It doesn't mean they want to eat the safe place to live, right? But it means they want that. That's what they long for. And so I'm going to just show you some pictures. Do you guys know what this is? These pictures? What these are from? Have you seen any pictures like this before? What do you see in these pictures? You guys see? There are pictures on these sheets. So, what do you guys notice about these? Who's in these pictures? Kids and grown-ups. Yeah, and what are they doing? Okay, so yeah, there's some kids and some people sitting by the side of the road, and what are these people doing? Where are they? Can you tell? Where are they? Does it look like they're up against something? Yeah, they're up against this kind of a wall or a fence. And there are people right now that are hungry and thirsty for food and for water and for safe places to live. And they're all along the border of our country. So if you look, this is a map of the United States. We live up here in Oregon. But down here in this green part, this is Mexico. And this little red line, if you guys can see the red line, all along, that's our border with Mexico. And right now, our government is in the process of building this giant wall, this giant fence, all the way along the border, really to keep people like this out, right? And these are people who are, there's lots of reasons why our government is doing this, but one of the biggest ones is simply fear of being afraid. And these are people who are hungry and thirsty for water, for food, for education, for new life. In many cases, they're fleeing danger. But some of us are having trouble letting them in. And so one of the things we know from listening to Jesus and the story of Jesus is that he always healed everybody that was in need. We heard that in the story of the leper this morning. And so one of the things that we do as followers of Jesus is we look for ways to help people in need. There's lots of ways that we do this at church. I'm going to show some pictures, see if you can figure out what people are doing. What are people doing here? Praying, right? So one of the important things that we do as church when we know there's a need is we pray. We ask for God to help the people. We ask for God to help us, to help the people. And we just, we hunger and thirst and ask God to be there for us and to be there for them. This is a good thing to do, but it's not the only thing that we should be doing. There's actually a lot more that we can do and that we do as a church. This is something we do. Can you tell what people are doing here? Watching TV. Yes. Now, this is not a lesson to go home and just watch television. Can you tell what they're watching? They're watching the news, right? So one of the things that we do as people who follow Jesus and as people who are people of faith is we watch the news and we try to find out what's going on. We try to ask questions. We try to learn what's happening, why is it happening, and what can we do to help? And sometimes the more we watch the news, and you may see your parents watching the news or talking about it, sometimes the more we watch the news, the more we even know what to pray for or how to pray. life. So these are two really important things that we do. But even these is not enough. There's more that we can do, because as Jesus modeled for us, we also have to take action. We also have to go out and do some things. So this is something else churches do and people do, and that we do as people. Do you guys know what's happening here? A protest, right? So these are people carrying signs. This is one in Portland where people were standing up for immigrants, for the people on our border. This is one in Salem, which is our capital. You've seen that building before? Yeah, that's our capital, right? So this is where we go down and we try to tell the people in government either what we really like or what we really don't like, and we make our voice heard. And this is another way that we help people in need. There's even more ways that we can help. What about this? Can you tell what people are doing here? Yeah, they're making packets, right? So another thing that we do sometimes we do here, we make mission bags for people in need, and these people are part of the church, and they're putting together toothpaste and other things that people need when they're waiting or when they're stuck in a shelter down on our border. And so they're providing something that people need when they just need basic things like toothpaste or diapers for children. There's even more that some churches are doing, and some people are doing. Can you tell what's happening here? They're hiking, yeah, and what are they carrying? Can you tell what they're carrying? Bottles of water, yeah. So there's some people that, particularly down in, right along the border here, is really desert. It's really hot and it's scary, and when people do, if they cross the border, sometimes there's no water to be found anywhere. And so there's some people who feel that it's in the way of following Jesus to take water and to put it into the desert, so that if people are trying to get across, they can actually have water to help them. And then lastly, this is something that just happened this week. Have you guys seen this? Do you know what this is? You might have seen these somewhere. What does this look like to you? It's a border, and what's going across? You see those pink things? Can you tell what that is? Have you seen one at your playground? Can you tell what that is? A teeter-totter or a seesaw. So some of your parents may have heard this story too, but there are some architects, some artists, who decided that because the border is breaking off relationships and cutting people off, they installed a seesaw on either side. And so kids on one side can come and they can basically seesaw back and forth with somebody else as a way to just remember that we are connected. We are all connected to each other. These are just some of the ways that we can help people in need. It's everything from using art to doing risky things like taking a hike in the desert, to putting together kits, to protesting our government, to watching the news, and to praying. And the thing is, we get to do all of these things. And it's important for us to try to do, wherever we can, to try to do at least one little thing to help. And so what I would encourage you to do, maybe this week with your families, is to talk with them about something that you might do, maybe one small thing that you could do, one action to take to help somebody in need this week. It could be people on our border, or it could just be somebody in our own community. Okay? Let's have a prayer, and we'll send you back on your way. Gracious God, we thank you for these children of the church. We thank you for hearts that are filled with love. We thank you for all the people who are working for good in our world, in this church and other churches, all the people of faith, all the people of good conscience, who are just working to bring about your peace and justice and healing. And so continue to show us how we can take action. Be with our children today as they learn more about you, and especially as they teach us more about you. And we pray this in your name, O Christ. Amen. And so today, Zoomers 2.5 to kindergarten, you guys can go out for class, and older kids, you guys can go back to your seats. Will you pray with me? Gracious God, hunger and thirst for you. We hunger and thirst for your justice and your peace in our world. And so we ask you just to be with us now, to open our eyes to new ways of seeing you, our ears to new ways of hearing you, our hearts to feel you with us, and our feet to follow in your way. And we pray this in your holy name. Amen. So as I said at the beginning of the scripture reading, if you were here last week, I talked a lot about the contemplative life and the call that we have to go inward, that each of us has been given a piece of God in us, and that part of our journey as people of faith is to go inward and to look at that God, to listen for the longing that we have for God. And in that, we know God better, we know ourselves better, and we come to know ourselves as beloved. But that is not all we do. And paired with that contemplative life is also a life of action. And one of the things that I shared last week was a conversation I had with one of the sisters at the monastery where I was about how sometimes contemplation gets divorced from action. And we see it as it's something that we're supposed to do, but it feels separate from the world out there. And in this conversation, she really helped me see the importance of contemplation as a basis for action. And that the more we see ourselves with compassion, the more we align ourselves with God's will in our own hearts, the more we actually align ourselves with the will for God in the world. And the more we begin to see the world with more compassion and more love. And that leads us to take action. The time for action is now. Reading the news, even just this weekend, just the last 24 hours, I didn't even hear about the second mass shooting that just happened at 1 a.m. this morning in Ohio until I got here at church this morning. But there is so much going on that demands our attention and demands our action right now. I was thinking, I've been back 2 weeks now, back here in the pulpit. And in those 2 weeks, I thought we had 3 mass shootings. That's what I was going to say this morning because of the one last week at the Gilroy Garlic Festival, then last night in El Paso, and then early this morning, the wee hours at a nightclub in Dayton, Ohio. So then I went online, and according, of course, to the gun violence statistics, there actually have been 18 mass shootings, 4 or more people killed in the last 14 days. That's more than one a day. And we cannot, for myriad reasons, get our act together as a country or as a people to figure out how to do something about this. Also, in the last 2 weeks, we had the 4 women congresswomen, the people of color, right, told by our president to basically go back to where they came from. People who've been elected by our citizens to go back to where they came from. We've had Elijah Cummings, the representative from Baltimore, raked over the coals by our president, and his entire city, Baltimore, which is where I went to high school in the suburbs, one of my hometowns, told that it's a rat-infested place where nobody would want to live. Clearly just racist, biased, horrible things to say. And then, of course, we have just the continuing deterioration of things on the border. And there was another death this week in Customs and Border custody. I've been reading Ron Wyden, our senator, has been going down and looking at the facilities and just continue to say how deplorable they are. This week, our president got access to billions more defense dollars to continue construction of the border wall. And I was listening to an NPR story about this earlier this week about Starr County, Texas, which is one of the counties affected by this. And it's actually where I lived for a year. Some of you have heard me talk about my year teaching high school. And it was right in the border city of Rio Grande City, right on the U.S.-Mexico border. And, I was there in about 2002 or 2003. And many of the students that I had were immigrants, or they were illegal. They had come across illegally because it's a place where it's an easier place to cross. It's shallower water and people come across. But the reality is to build the wall through there just cuts people from their families, people from their land. In the case of the students, many of them, they were there, right, because they wanted better lives. They wanted their families wanted more opportunities. They needed safety. They needed security, and they weren't here to steal our jobs and all the other things that are painful. So anyway, when I was listening to this story, there's 52 miles of border in Starr County and Rio Grande River, and the wall is going to cost up, it said in some parts, $24 million a mile. That's like $1 trillion just for that one county in Texas. And I just listened to this and I'm like, this is insane. This is crazy. Like somehow our government can come up with this kind of money to install a wall, and we cannot come up with money to figure out how to fight gun violence. We can't come up with money to figure out how to have humane conditions for people that we illegally detain. We can't find money for the kids. When I taught in that school, we didn't have enough textbooks to give our kids. All of our kids were on free and reduced lunch because they couldn't make ends meet at home. It was a huge poverty-stricken area, one of the highest rates of childhood obesity. There's no money that was being poured into textbooks or obesity or the health of those kids. And yet we can come up with this money for the law. I mean, it's egregious and outrageous. And what is just so troubling is it is all being done in our name. It's all being done in the name of America. And we are part and parcel of that, whether we want to admit it or not. It means that we have to take action. And we are in some ways, but I don't know, I keep sort of thinking like somehow it's just going to get better, like somehow the leaders are going to start doing their jobs or figure out a better way to do it, or somehow like the really, really prophetic people are going to just get us going, but the time is now, and it's going to be us that need to continue to step up and speak up and take action. And when I was looking at the scripture readings this week, I just felt my own deep conviction, particularly in this story around Mark, the story of the leper. And if you listen to this, there was something that it's always jumped out at me, but this week in particular really jumped out at me. And that is in the question that the leper asked Jesus. He comes and he says, if you choose, you can make me clean. If you choose. He recognized that Jesus had power. He knew Jesus' reputation. He knew that Jesus was someone who could heal him, who had the power and the authority or the privilege, whatever it is. And that Jesus truly had a choice. He could choose to look at this leper and see what was going on. He could choose to see the deep need and work to heal the person. Or he could choose to look away. He could choose to not be bothered at this time. He could choose to say, well, I don't really actually want to get unclean by touching you. I don't really have time for this right now. Or it's not really, I don't know you that well, so I'm not going to take care of you. Or he had all kinds of choices. But we know, of course, that Jesus did choose. He said, I do choose and be made clean. And as I listened to this, I heard the voice of sort of every immigrant on our border. I heard the voice of every victim of gun violence. I heard the voice of all the people just striving for a voice and a place at the table, looking at me and asking me, if you choose, you can make me well. You can help make me well. And that year that I was in Texas, I talked a little bit about it here. I got an education about culture, about immigration, about poverty. But I also got an education about my own privilege and just how saturated I am in it. I mean, I came in there by choice. I had traveled all over the world. Most of my students had never been outside of this tiny little town in Texas. So I tried to expose them to different things, but it was probably a month into the job where I'm like, I'm not staying here. I'm going to get out of here. And I did. Within a year, I left because I could, because I had the resources, I had the money, I had the opportunities, and I went from there to Yale, of all places, to talk about a juxtaposition. And the reality is, I still live in that bubble of privilege. And frankly, most of us here do. Most of us here are white, and we continue to live in white supremacist culture, which just benefits us like crazy. Most of us here are wealthy, or if not wealthy, we're fairly, well off and middle class. We're comfortable. And so the idea is we have a choice in some ways. We can choose to just continue to stay in our home comfort, continue to turn a blind eye, to continue to think, well, it hasn't totally reached me yet, or to think, well, somebody else surely is going to take care of it, which is truly like part of what I've been, part of the attitude that I've had is like, there are other people better equipped to do this. There are other people with more authority to do this. And things are they're getting far worse. And I just realized how much my own voice is needed, and how much I have been too silent, and how much I have been too complicit. And I think we're doing good work here, but I think that there is so much more that we could be doing individually and communally. And I think this week I just heard really wonderful, there were some wonderful responses going around to what's happening. Some of you may have seen some of these. The Baltimore Sun, the editorial board, wrote this incredible letter back about just basically who does the president think he is, kind of saying this stuff. And here is all the gifts of our city, and here's why we have to treat each other better. The clergy from the National Cathedral, the Episcopal Cathedral in Washington, D.C., which does all the state funerals and things, they wrote a letter that said we can't do this anymore. We can't allow this kind of language, we cannot allow this kind of leadership, and it goes against everything that we believe in. And so the UCC continues to be on the front lines of that, but I just realized for myself how much more I need to say, and how much more I think many of us feel like we need to say and want to say. And so today is a little bit about encouraging us to do that. I want to commend a book to you. Some of you may have seen this, some of you I know are already reading this. This is a book by Joan Chittister called The Time Is Now, A Call to Uncommon Courage. And Joan Chittister is a Benedictine sister. She writes a lot about the contemplative life, but also a ton about social justice and about putting our faith into action. And it's her latest book, and it's really a clear call that the time is now. The people are us as people of Christian faith. And all of us, no matter how much we think our voice won't count or won't matter, we have to speak up. And that it is not going to get any better until we all lend our voice in. I wanted to put a quote in the bulletin, and I just couldn't figure out which one, because there are just so many. And we may try to do this as a church study as well, but don't wait till then. Just read it now. But among the things she talks about is basically how, as Christians, we have this whole prophetic tradition from Israel, and we have Jesus as the model of someone who not just healed, but was a justice seeker. And she talks about how contemplation and action have been divorced, and how in the church we've often just grown comfortable with our rituals. We come to church, we pray, we have our book discussions, and then we go back to the comfort of our lives. And what she says is, yes, the Christian ideal is personal goodness, of course, but personal goodness requires that we be more than pious, more than faithful to the system, more than mere card-carrying members of the Christian community. Christianity requires as well that we each be so much a prophetic presence that our corner of the world becomes a better place because we have been there. And so this idea that without action, is not going to mean very much. One of the other things she says is that it's easy to get overwhelmed, and this is, I know, what some of us feel, because I've talked about it with you, and I feel it myself, is that it's really easy to get overwhelmed and know, like, how can we even make a dent in any of this stuff? And here's a little bit what she has to say about that. She says, understanding the presence, its ills and its sins, is the essence of a prophetic spiritual life. To be a follower of Jesus and ignore those who sit blind by the side of the road calling for help because, we say, we are too busy to do anything, unmasks our commitment to comfort. The question is not what are we doing, the question is what should we be doing in this time and on this day and in this particular situation. The question is not how can we do it all. The question is, do we do any small thing to participate in binding up the wounds of the world? And so I think the question for us to think about is, how can we take action? What do we choose? How can we do even just one small thing? Many of us are doing many things, but to even take a step further, to take a step even further out of our comfort zone, to take a step even further into something maybe we've been wondering about, but afraid to do or afraid to speak up, and to just listen to that call and to act together. As a church, there's some ways that we are doing this already, and that we have invitations to continue to do this. Over the last 2 years, we've been putting our message, trying to get our message out more broadly in the community in one concrete way through signs that we have along Country Cove Road. We have signs that say reject racism, protect the environment, fight for the powerless, welcome signs. And if you read your e-news this week, you know that earlier this week those signs were torn down and thrown into the street. And it's just a sign of our times, right? But our council, our leaders, we talked about, well, we're putting them right back up, and while we're placing the order, let's get another one that says, welcome the stranger, which is what we did, so that'll be here soon. But it's about continuing to put that voice out there. Tomorrow we're hosting Respond to Racism again, which if you haven't been, it's a great opportunity to just see the work that is going on in our community. And so much of what's happening now has underneath it racism. I mean, the immigration crisis, all the stuff happening in the congressman in Baltimore, all of that is race-based. And the way we continue to fight that is starting right here in our own hearts and relationships and community, and to continue to do that work. And then we may be asked also to do even bigger things. Last week, if you were here, you heard Jan, I think, stood up and talked about our immigrant welcoming congregations, and that there was a call about could anyone in our conference think about housing a family from Tucson, a mom and 3 kids. And this to me was just, it was a rub in both ways, I guess. One was, of course, I personally went like, oh, could we do this? We have a house, we have a guest room, we have kids, we have toys even. And then the privilege of me is like, oh, but we're gonna get some work done in our kitchen, so it's probably not the best time. And I was like, yeah, it's not gonna work this time. And I just was like, this is crazy. This is still that privilege talking like, I don't want to be inconvenienced, I don't want somebody else maybe to be inconvenienced. But then there were at least two people in our congregation who did identify themselves as people who might be willing to have to host people in their homes. And the question was then, well, what kind of supports do we need? And how could we get around this? And what would it take? And those conversations, as we were starting to have them, they weren't happening quickly enough in order to house this particular family, so they found another arrangement. But now there is ongoing conversation about within our churches, wider UCC, but also I think we'll be talking about here in our church about, is this something that we could do? We have people willing to host, but what would that look like? And could it be something that as a church we rally around and gather around and actually make a difference in that way? And one of the reasons that stuck with me is because I've heard the story of Watson, the shelter here, and how the call came to all the churches, is there anyone who could house a family that's homeless? And the first time around, as the story goes, all the churches said, no, we can't do it, we don't really have a room. And then the call came again, and this church said, yes. We don't know how we're going to do it. We're going to figure out and find a way, but we're going to make this happen because the need is important. And so a family came and lived in what's now our storage closet, and it was inconvenient for them, and it was inconvenient for us, but out of that has come many more families helped through lots of, and many more shelters. And it's just a great example of what we can do when we listen to that God that is inside of us, that is inside of a church, that invites us to risk and take action. One of the things that Joan Chittister also says in this book is that the more you take action, the more you come back to contemplation, because there will be pushback. There'll be people who tear down your signs or tell you what you're doing is not right. And the more it forces you to rely on God and the hunger and thirst for God. And so it's this relationship that continues to feed each other. So the question again for us is just to think about, how is God calling us to act? How is God calling us individually, maybe to take one more small step? And how is God calling us as a church to continue to live out God's will of peace and justice for the world? Amen. And so I want to invite Pam Rossio to come forward and just give a quick update on the work that we have done as a church around immigration, and just share with us briefly about how the actions that we have done have made a difference.
I wrote it so it would be really brief. I know I gotta get it open. So first of all, thank you for your support, especially this last legislative session. Emerge, which we are a big supporter and a part of, which is the interfaith movement for immigrant justice. The focus this year was really on acting locally and on legislation. Jose Antonio Vargas, one of my heroes, who is an undocumented Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and founder of Define Americans, said that when we saw him in Oregon, said, if you really want to do something, you need to get driver's licenses for undocumented people. And so that's really been held in my heart. And anyway, we finally did it. Imagine this. We now have driver's licenses for all, access to legal representation for people seeking asylum and facing deportation across the state, stronger protections against hate crimes, and extended case management for refugees as they settle into their new homes. Andrea Salinas, our state representative, and Rod Wagner, our state senator, were incredibly supportive and warriors in this. I'm proud to call them my state representatives. Thank you for your support, for the postcards you wrote, the calls you made, and for those of you that went down to Salem on the State Advocacy Day. Our work is not done, but we are making a difference in our state. It gives me great hope.
So let us go forth this day, trusting in that God who is with us, trusting with a God who is at work in the world, and trusting with a God who gives us the power and the strength that we need. Let us go in peace to love and serve. Amen.
Amen.